over the weekend, Major League Baseball, the national pastime, decided that they would become just the Democratic pastime. They decided that they were going to cancel the All-Star game in Georgia. This cancellation was based on overt Democratic lies, parroted and forwarded by an establishment media that are partisan hacks. They are partisan activist liars. This is what they do for a living. Now, I've been hesitant to use the phrase enemy of the people because it's a Stalinist phrase that suggests that people should go to jail or that bad things should happen to people. But let me just say that the media are the enemies of the truth. The establishment media are just partisan hacks at this point. They have allowed Joe Biden and the Biden administration to simply lie about the content of this Georgia voter law, which is more liberal with regard to early voting than laws in places like New Jersey. Its voter ID requirement is utterly uncontroversial. It did not dismantle all ballot drop boxes or anything like that. Ballot drop boxes are a new thing that were sort of created for the pandemic. It limited the number of those. It didn't get rid of all of them. It expanded in many ways the voting hours in Georgia. This is an extraordinarily mild law in Georgia, but that's not what you'd get if you read your mainstream media. If you read your establishment media, what you would get is that this was a Jim Crow attempt to stop black people from voting. That was a lie, a lie, a lie. It was a lie all the way through. And Joe Biden kept saying Jim Crow over and over and over. And nobody in the media saw fit to fact check that statement. They would fact check very specific statements that Joe Biden made on occasion. So you get the Washington Post giving Joe Biden 4 Pinocchios for suggesting that the Georgia bill limited voting hours. But would they overall rate his statement that this was like a Jim Crow voting law? Of course not. Of course not. Even though it is overtly a lie. You have to be so unbelievably ignorant and stupid to believe that this Georgia law has anything to do with Jim Crow. And yet, if you polled Americans, I would bet money that half of Americans think that this is Jim Crow racism, this Georgia voter law, which again is more liberal than Delaware state voting law, apparently. So here's what happened. Joe Biden and the Biden administration and his partners in the media, because that's what they are not objective in any way. They are simply propagandists on behalf of the Democratic Party. This partisan hack group decided to push that lie, and not just push that lie, then in activist fashion to try and pressure private corporations into pressuring public bodies like the Georgia state legislature or like the governor of Georgia. So they're trying to mobilize corporations to do their dirty work for them. They don't have control of the levers of power in Georgia. So instead what they're going to do is they're going to try and get private corporations to pressure all of these public bodies into doing what they want. Now, there's a certain irony to this. Members of the left are constantly saying, corporations, they shouldn't be donating money in politics. They shouldn't be in politics. Look at these corporations with their corporate money influencing politics. And then, at the exact same time, they will demand that these corporations actively use their businesses, right? Not just their funds, their businesses themselves. They should change how they do business in order to punish Republican states. And so they put a lot of pressure on Major League Baseball. Joe Biden went on ESPN and he overtly called for Major League Baseball to remove the All-Star game from Georgia. And Major League Baseball and Rob Manfred, who's an abject coward, he's a pathetic, abject coward. He's a yellow-bellied coward. That cowardly, ridiculous person decided, you know what? That's what we're going to do. We're going to pull the All-Star game from Georgia. And this follows in the footsteps of other sports that have done similar things. We saw the NCAA pull basketball games from North Carolina after a bill that would have protected women's bathrooms in Charlotte. We saw that there were sports leagues that attempted to target Arizona in the aftermath of Jan Brewer, former governor of Arizona, pushing the idea that Arizona was going to enforce immigration law on a state level. This is nothing new. It's just the latest iteration. And it's the most ridiculous iteration because it is based on just complete, utter lies. Again, the Georgia law is not offensive for anyone who's actually looked at the Georgia law. The lies about this bill are insane. The lie that you can't drink water or be given water if you're 150 feet from a polling place. No, you can't have a partisan activist bring you water. But there are poll workers there, and they will bring you water. You can bring water yourself. You can have a friend go get you water. This is the same law that applies in a bevy of states. But that's not what you heard about this law, is it? What you heard from Stacey Abrams, who is a liar, and Joe Biden, who is a liar, and the media, who are liars, is that this is a Jim Crow voting tactic designed to stop black people from voting. Again, an overt lie. And Major League Baseball decided to mirror that lie. Okay, again, these lies were consistent over and over, and the media just repeated them. The Washington Post reported, Abrams actually claimed, this is a claim from Stacey Abrams, again, the greatest politician in American history. Stacey Abrams, she claimed, quote, that the Georgia GOP traded economic opportunity for suppression. This was suppression of the vote. Okay, the Washington Post, by the way, did report in a fact check that experts consulted by the newspaper said the net effect was to expand the opportunities to vote for most Georgians, not limit them. But that didn't stop the Washington Post from simply repeating ad nauseum Joe Biden's lines about how this was Jim Crow racism. Biden said that he would strongly support the league boycotting the city over the law that was passed by democratically elected officials, according to Daily Wire. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp fought back against all of this. He said, there's no way we should apologize for this law. Are you guys insane? There's nothing wrong with the law.
There were mechanical issues that needed to be fixed. There were reasons to try to figure out a better way, a more accessible way, and a more secure way for us to hold elections. And there is nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't apologize for wanting to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Then maybe there's an argument for boycotts and protests and moving all-star games. But that is not what happened. What happened was Georgia is going to have secure, very accessible, and fair elections in the future in this state.
Okay, Kemp also went ahead and slammed Joe Biden, who, of course, had lied about the Georgia law over and over and over again.
It certainly doesn't help when you have the President of the United States saying that, and nobody in the national media, at least in the mainstream media, will even ask for a correction when he simply lies, gets four Pinocchios of all people, of all places, from the Washington Post. I mean, that should tell you right there, he's not being truthful. He continues to lie and mislead about what the bill does.
So how exactly did this boycott come about by the MLB? How exactly did Major League Baseball, America's national pastime, decide that they are simply going to inject themselves into American politics on the state level and punish states on the basis of democratic lies? How did this happen? I'll give you that story in just 1 second, because it truly is incredible. It shows you how a small intransigent group of people, along with the media pushing from the outside in activist fashion, can make this stuff happen. It really is an amazing, amazing thing. How did all of this materialize? It materialized because, just like all corporate blowhardism, basically you have a small intransigent group of people inside a corporation. They don't have to be very large. They just have to be very loud and very intransigent. And they work an inside-outside game with the media. They push from the inside, the small intransigent group of folks. And then you have the media pretending that this represents a broad majority inside the corporation and threatening that corporation with outside action if they refuse to acknowledge what these wokesters inside their own halls want. Right? This is how you get Coca-Cola. You get Coca-Cola because you have a very small percentage of employees at Coca-Cola, 20% of the employees, and they decide that they don't like the Georgia law. And then you have the media on the outside yelling at Coke. And you have all of the heads of Coke going, well, does it really matter if we just say we don't like the Georgia law? Is that really that big a deal? We'll just put out a statement saying we don't like it, and then they'll leave us alone. Okay, this is what happened with the MLB, with Major League Baseball. And again, on a personal level, I don't have a lot of brand investments, right? I don't care if I don't drink Coke. It doesn't make any difference to me. I don't drink Coke in the first place. I'm not a soda person. But I do care about Major League Baseball. I'm an enormous baseball fan. I've been an enormous baseball fan my entire life. My father and I wrote a full-on book about the 2005 Chicago White Sox championship season. We went through literally every game that season. That's how big a baseball fan I am. I'm a huge, huge baseball fan. I grew up with it. It's a part of sort of the lifeblood of the country. And seeing that lifeblood poisoned with the politics of wokeness is deeply disturbing. It's disturbing on a number of levels. First, they're taking things that we all should be able to share together, and they're wrecking them. They're politicizing them. But just as importantly, they're taking cherished aspects of American culture, and they are turning them to politics. And once you do that, there's nothing we share. The left is making it so there's literally nothing we share. We can't share a baseball game without getting political. We can't pick a razor brand without getting political. Everything is political now, and this is the way they want it. This is why when you hear some conservatives say, why are you so worried about the culture wars? Why don't you just worry about the spending? I care about the spending. I do. I care about Joe Biden's crappy bills. We'll get to that. But I care much more deeply about culture because culture is upstream of politics. A culture that refuses to acknowledge dissent as legitimate. A culture that refuses to acknowledge political diversity. A culture that says you can't work at this corporation because you voted for Trump, or that you can't have an all-star game in your state if you voted the way we don't like. That culture is not destined to remain. That is a culture that is destined to break down, to polarize, and then to just collapse in on itself like a dying star. And that's what we're seeing in the United States right now. How exactly did Major League Baseball, again, a coalition of teams with an antitrust exemption that should be removed now, how did that coalition of teams with teams all over the United States, including in red areas? Okay, Georgia, despite the fact that it just elected 2 blue senators in a bizarre special election, it still is a red state. It has a red legislature. It has a red governor. And now after this, it's going to have 2 red senators next time it comes up. How exactly did this league decide that it was time to just alienate half of its fan base, minimum half of its fan base? Commissioner Rob Manfred, according to ESPN, made the decision to move the All-Star Game and events, along with the amateur draft from Atlanta, after discussions with individual big leaguers and the Players Alliance, an organization of black players formed after the death of George Floyd last year. This all came together rather quickly, said Chicago Cubs outfielder Jason Hayward, who is black. We had, I think, a day left in spring training. The Players Alliance, we gathered and got as many people as we could on a call. It was probably less than 50 guys on there out of the 100 or whatever. We had our conversation. We knew how we felt about it. We wanted to make sure, I think, that regardless of what happened, the decision was made and that we were there to do what we could in Atlanta. So, number one, they promulgated a lie that the Georgia voter law was about voter suppression. It was not. And that was based on a larger lie that Democrats were pushing over the course of the last few years, which is every time they lost an election, it was about suppression of the black vote. It was a lie. It's been a lie. It continues to be a lie. This has nothing to do with Jim Crow, it has nothing to do with race, and it's disgusting. I mean, really repulsive that the media parroted that lie and treated it as legitimate over and over and over. But for our purposes, it's just as important to see that the MLB shifted its entire stance and removed, according to the Cobb County officials in Georgia, $100 million in revenue from Cobb County because 45 players in MLB decided to write a letter to Rob Manfred. I mean, that's unbelievable. And according to Daily Wire, Georgia County that voted for Biden will lose $100 million over the MLB relocating the game. $100 million is removed from the local economy. People will lose their jobs because Jason Hayward, who makes millions of dollars for being an overrated baseball player, and some 40 other players decided that it was deeply necessary for the MLB to move its All-Star game. And Rob Manfred, because he's a coward, decided to go along with it. But was it really about those players? It wasn't only about those players. It was certainly partially about those players because those players were very loud and they were shouting about racial justice, even though, again, this had nothing to do with race and it was based on a lie. But it was about this intransigent, woke minority inside MLB combined with a media that was actively pushing this stuff. And when I say actively pushing this stuff, let me give you an example of just how actively they were pushing this stuff in just 1 second, because this is it shows what the media are. They are an activist propaganda group on behalf of the Democratic Party. That's all they are. They deserve no more respect than the normal press release that you get from the DNC or from the Democratic National Campaign Committee or from Media Matters. They're just an activist group. They're a propaganda outlet. They are the Pravda of the Democratic Party. Here is the proof that your media are just a bag of flaming garbage who need to be torn down. Okay, CBS, and they're just activists. CBS, because it's MLB didn't shift just because of these woke players, these 45 woke players or whomever. By the way, how many total MLB players, total number of MLB players right now is something like 1,000. There are 1,000 players on opening day rosters of the MLB. Over 1,000. Less than 50 players made the MLB move that, according to ESPN. That's how little the intransigent minority has to be in order to reshape the entire industry. It's unreal. And that only happens because the media are who the media are. Because what do the media do? What the media do is they then call up MLB's advertisers. They call up Coca-Cola and they say, you guys advertise with MLB. You just said that you came out against the Georgia bill. But I see that you're advertising with the MLB who's having their All-Star game in Georgia. Why would you do that? And then Coca-Cola calls up MLB and they say, you know what? It's real awkward for us. Why don't you move the All-Star game? That's how this little pathetic game works. And the media are in on it. When the media call up Coca-Cola for comment, they're not calling them for comment. They're demanding action from Coca-Cola because the threat is we are now going to run a headline saying that Coca-Cola is a bunch of hypocrites. This is why, number one, these corporations should never give an inch, because once the inch is given, they are done. As the minute you feed a toe to the alligator, the rest of you is gone. Okay, this is the Robert Shaw scene in Jaws. The minute you're sliding down that deck and you're trying to fend off the shark with your feet, pretty soon you're going to find your torso in its mouth. That is what's happening to all of these corporations right now. So, this is the perfect proof. CBS put out a headline over the weekend. Here was the headline. It was Friday night. Quote, 3 ways companies can help fight Georgia's restrictive new voting law. Does that sound like news to you? That was not in their opinion section. There was no opinion tag or disclaimer on the article. 3 ways companies can help fight Georgia's restrictive new voting law. So, number one, a few problems. 1, it is not a restrictive new voting law. It expands voting. Expands it. 2, so that's just a lie. 2, that is a perfectly activist headline. You would see that from the Democratic National Committee. You would see that at Stacey Abrams' website. 3 ways companies can help fight, right? The implication being if you don't, then you're in favor of Georgia's evil, restrictive new voting law. The media are activists. If you give them an iota of respect, it is because you're being a dum-dum. They deserve none of your respect. This doesn't mean don't watch what they say and then don't fact check it. You should fact check it. But if you take what they say at face value, it's because you're a moron. There's no way that you should be watching CBS News and taking it at face value. There's just no way to do it. And it's just mirroring Democratic Party priorities. That's all they do. That's their actual agenda. Why? Because if the media actually reported what's going on with MLB, it would be perfectly obvious how hypocritical MLB is. As Fox News reported, it turns out that Major League Baseball is protesting that Georgia voting law. Meanwhile, they have bolstered ties with the Communist Party-backed Chinese company that cracked down on an NBA executive who supported the pro-democracy move in Hong Kong. The MLB signed a deal with Tencent on Wednesday. It's one of China's largest tech companies. It's one of the Chinese firms that briefly dropped NBA games in 2019. After former Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey publicly voiced support for pro-democracy protesters facing a Beijing-backed crackdown in Hong Kong. As always, it turns out that these sports teams, it's all about the money. It's not about how they are principled opponents of the Georgia voting law. It's because they wish to avoid the scrutiny of the media, who don't care at all that all of these corporations are doing business with the worst people on earth, companies that are sponsored by the repressive and tyrannical Chinese government. It's an incredible. That headline, my goodness, CBS News eventually pulled it. But the fact that it was even up just demonstrates where your media are. And they are garbage. By the way, speaking of hypocrisy, remember, Joe Biden called for MLB to move the All-Star game. Right? That's the real reason this happened. Joe Biden called for it. Stacey Abrams didn't call for it, but basically said that the Georgia voting law is Jim Crow, which promulgated the myth. The media pushed it, and then you had just enough people inside MLB yelling about it that Rob Manfred wimped out because that's what he was going to do. Meanwhile, Jen Psaki can't answer a very simple question. Why is it that you're saying companies should boycott Georgia, but you, the President of the United States, the White House, you are not calling for the United States to boycott the Olympics in China, which it turns out is, you want to know a country that has really restrictive voting laws, like super restrictive voting laws, not about like people who are partisan giving water bottles to people 150 paces from the voting place, but, you know, people being sent to detention camps if they vote the wrong way. You know, China. Bad voting laws over there. And yet, strangely, Joe Biden seems perfectly willing to have an Olympics in China.
When can we expect a final determination from the president about the United States participating in the Beijing Olympics, given that he said the Chinese president doesn't have a democratic bone in his body?
Well, I think the U.S. Olympic Committee would play a big role in
on Major League Baseball here in the United States.
He actually didn't. I don't know if you heard the answer that happened a few minutes ago, where we addressed this, and I answered the question. So, and I give a little more context, but maybe you weren't paying attention to that part.
Oh no, you're just a liar. You're just a liar. You're fine with the United States doing the Beijing Olympics because you don't care if China represses its own people. But you do care about lying about Georgia so that you can presumably win a bigger share of the black vote by lying to black voters that Jim Crow is coming for them. It's not a shock that the same Joe Biden who claimed that Mitt Romney wanted to put black people back in chains is claiming that a law that expands voting access in Georgia actually restricts it to hurt black people. They're just damned liars, and the media repeat it. They repeat it full scale. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.